Okay, has the recording started? Yes, good. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, we come to almost, last set of slides for the semester, and we have, done this long journey throughout the semester, understanding different aspects of designs, high-level designs, low-level designs, and all different, details. So for the last, 2.5 lectures, we have been focusing on software construction and understanding the specs. So the other day on Tuesday, we talked about, designing specifications and understanding that, there are 3 dimensions to them. uh, we compare or we can understand the specs from deterministic versus underdetermined specs. And we can also look at declarative versus operational specs, and we had a discussion about which one is better. Now today we're going to look at the 3rd dimension, which is basically the strengths of your preconditions and postconditions. In other words, the stronger and the weaker specifications, and how we use this concept or this 3rd dimension to compare different specifications. And then eventually at the end we'll be talking about summing this whole thing up. I'll be trying to explain how we should be writing good useful specifications, because at the end of the day this is what we are interested in. And I'll be showing you some bad examples just to help us understand that we should try our best to avoid them. So ready for this?
Yes.
Great. Great. Now, so let's start with this stronger versus weaker specs, which is the 3rd dimension of the comparisons. Now, I like your special attention for this one in the beginning, especially because this is slightly different from the first 2 dimensions we looked at, and they're not. It's not difficult, but sometimes it takes a bit of time to get used to it. So we are saying that specification S2 will be stronger than or equal to a specification S1 when you know when your S2's precondition is weaker or equal to S1. Okay, and the second thing is that your S2's postcondition is stronger or equal to S1. So in other words, we're saying that if you have a program here, right, a method for which specifications are already available, and the clients as a result of course are using these specs, right? So they are giving you inputs and expecting certain outputs based on these specifications. Now for some reason you have to go on and change the specs because maybe the implementation has changed, or maybe the expectations have changed, or requirements have changed. So you come up with the new specifications. In this case we call them S2, for example. Then ideally you would like to do such a thing that if I replace the old specs with the newer one, we hope that it does not really impact our implementation. It doesn't really impact our clients as well, right? So that's why we have to compare, and then we have to see that which one of the specs can be replacing the other ones without impacting or minimizing the impact. So we say S2 is stronger or equal to S1 when the preconditions on S2, which is the new specs, is weaker than the old one, and its post conditions are stronger than the old ones, right? So if this is happening, if this is the case, then basically what you can do is you can go on and implement. So you can have an implementation that satisfies S2, can also be used to satisfy S1 as well, and it's safe to replace your S1 with the S2 in your program. So, this is the whole concept of stronger versus weaker specs, that your new specs preconditions are weaker or equal, and your post conditions are stronger or equal. Now what's the meaning of a weaker or a stronger? Let me explain this with the help of an example here now. So these two rules, of course, in addition to the way they are stated, they also give you more ideas about how you can, some inherent properties of these rules as well. So basically what happens that they can tell you always that you can always weaken your preconditions. So if you weaken your preconditions, probably it will be easier for you to replace that specs, or other programs can use it. So placing fewer demands on the client, of course, is always, good thing, right? The clients are always happy that, you don't have to, for them to use this specific method, they don't have to meet a very tough precondition. Like, for example, the array should have all the elements should be sorted, for example. This is a really tough precondition because you really have to write a piece of code which will sort it for them, right? So if you put less demands on the clients, of course, they will be happier. This is the meaning of weakening the preconditions. And of course, nobody complains about strengthening or strengthening the post conditions because, you're promising more. So the whole idea here is that, if you minimize your preconditions, and which means put less demands on the clients and make your post condition stronger, which means you're making more promises, it's easy for you to replace one specs with the others, and without having a lot of impact or minimizing the impact on the rest of the program. Yes,
Doctor,
please. Yes,
yes,
please.
for the specification, if we, for example, have a specification that does not have any preconditions, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to make the new one or the S2 to have at least like one precondition in
Mm-hmm.
order to make the specification better or to be more convenient.
Mm-hmm. No, in
What?
that case, yeah. So in that case, basically, since we don't have any precondition to be, this means we have the weakest possible precondition anyway, right?
Yes.
Again, if it makes sense in your case that you want to put some preconditions, at least some bare minimum ones, because you believe that that will give us a better design of the application, of course, go ahead and do it, right? So this concept of making a strong specs versus a weak specs is a concept for us to understand that, if when we make changes to our specs, where we can make changes, right? Uh,
Yes.
but this is just a tool, just a parameter, a dimension for us to consider. But since it's a design, uh, again, we can come up with a structure of our specs which may have preconditions, which because we believe in our context it makes sense.
Yes. I got
Right.
it.
So yeah. So the message here is, thank you very much for the question. The message here is not that we try to make preconditions as weak as possible and come to a stage where we have no preconditions, because otherwise then what's the point of having preconditions to begin with, right? The message here is you can reduce your preconditions where possible, and you can strengthen your post conditions where possible, and then as a result, you can manage or compare or change one specs with others. So probably this will become even more clearer with the help of our examples, right? So remember the find example we have been talking about from a couple of lectures. So what's the precondition here? The precondition here is that, what happened here? Okay, so the precondition here is that, come on. Okay, yeah. So the precondition here is that, value occurs exactly once, right? And I'm saying that I can, and post condition here is that, you will return the index value. So I'm saying I can replace this specs with this one. Remember, if you have to replace one, what are the two rules? For the precondition, what's the rule?
Weaker or equal, and the post condition stronger or equal.
Exactly. So I'm suggesting now that I can go on and replace this one with this specs. Am I correct? And what I have done, have I weakened the preconditions, or I have made my post conditions stronger here?
I think you make it stronger. I mean the requirement, the precondition.
So the precondition, I have made them stronger or weaker right now by because again, I think everybody picks this up. Nothing has happened to the post condition because it's exactly the same thing, right?
Yes,
And
I
so
think
in
you
this,
make it weaker.
I
I
have made
think
it weaker, right? How?
because you have said that in the beginning occurs exactly once in A, but now you make it like more general. and open.
more general and more open, right? So like, for example, in this case, if I have an array with values, for example, 5, 6, and 7, right? And I'm looking for a value of 5, for example, right? Will it satisfy the precondition for this spec?
Yes.
It does, right? Now, if, for example, I pass on a value of 5, 5, and 6, and I'm still looking for a value of 5, does it satisfy this precondition?
No.
Yes.
Yes or no?
No. For the first
No,
one, no. I mean,
no,
for the
no,
second one,
exactly.
yes.
Yes, for the second one, yes. For the first one, no, and so on and so forth, right? So, and of course, there's a third possibility, which is basically, I have values of 1 and 2, and I'm looking for 5. Does it satisfy this precondition?
Yes. Maybe because it will give you.
Lala, think again.
No, no, it
The,
doesn't.
No.
it,
Yes.
it does not satisfy this precondition because value has to occur exactly
Oh, yes.
once, right?
I was thinking about the functionality in general, like
Okay,
it
yes,
would give some message or
yes, yes,
get
yes,
that.
yes. Yeah, so this is a good point here, Yani. I want you guys to think about specs here, right? Because this is the whole idea, right? So yeah. Now if I now for these three inputs, when I have replaced my precondition with the newer one, which is basically I have weakened it, can I use this one here?
Yes.
What about this one?
Also the same thing.
Same thing. So I now in the previous specs, I was not able to use this one, right? But now I can use it, right? Of course, the third one is still the case. It will not be allowed, right? So that's the whole idea that you weaken your preconditions. This is what we were saying here that, you can start replacing them as long as you weak your preconditions and the post conditions are at least, could be strong or at least the same.
Doctor, like it's a bit tricky to use the term weaker
Mhm.
for this, but if you look like deeply in it, it gets more clear.
Correct,
Because when you
correct.
see weaker, like it's
Yes, yes, yes,
instead of
yes.
one input, instead of two input, you get one input, for
E-
example, as precondition.
exactly. And that's what I was saying that this third dimension in the beginning might look more like counterintuitive, but if once we look at some examples and understand them, it makes a lot of sense, right? So now I'm gonna now take this back, right, and I'm gonna make it a bit change there as well. So I can replace this one with this new spec. Now what I have done here, have I made any change to the precondition from the previous one?
It's the same as the second one.
It's same as the second one. What happened to my post condition?
It will return one index, or the first index it finds matching
Hmm.
the same value.
No, now this time around it will give you the lowest index, right? Previously, I was promising I will return an index, right? So for this value, 556, precondition has been relaxed, hence I can use this array, but it still depends on whether I implement it using find first or find last, correct? So I reduced my precondition, but now, of course, you know, the value which is returned will depend on find first or find last, right? I made no promise there, so I can have multiple, legal outputs out here, right? Isn't it?
Yes.
But what I have done here now, by making my post condition stronger. Previously, I was saying I'll just return you the index. Now I'm saying no, I will not just return the index, I will just return the lowest index. So I'm making more promise here now, right?
Yes.
So
Doctor,
this means, yes, please.
why didn't you say like to get all the indexes of the same value from the array? Isn't that
Oh,
would make it stronger? Like I was
mm,
thinking from that way.
mm. Okay, now that's a good one now. Again, think about strongness and weaknesses not in terms of the values it will return. right? Or the arguments it can accept. It is all about, the context is all about, is it able to, by reducing or weakening the precondition, it means, is it able to have a more larger set of, valid inputs? And by saying the post condition and making them stronger means that am I returning more precise information, right? So think from that perspective. So of course we are making our post condition stronger here. Now, of course, this means what? Of course, finding first is an obvious implementation for this, right?
Pardon me, Doctor, but could you repeat the last point that about the
Yes. So
strong and the,
yes. So by weakening, I mean we are not talking about weakening in a sense that I have, for example, in the beginning I had two input parameters. Now I have one input parameter. So it's nothing to do with the input parameters. It's nothing to do with the actual return value, right? The weakness means, by weakness, what we really mean is that, we put fewer demands on clients, right, for them to use that method.
it's like more flexible
More
and
flexible.
strong and more strict in term of the output
Exactly. So we make
and
our
more
things.
exact.
Exactly. So basically, in terms of inputs, we make them more flexible. This is what's the meaning of weakness here, right? So make them more flexible, hence more clients can use, or clients can use them in an easier way. And we make our outputs or post conditions stronger, which basically means, we give them more precise information, or, more details, and so on and so forth.
Yes, I guess.
So this is the fundamental concept. This is the third dimension.
Doctor,
We Yes, please.
the client need to satisfy the precondition, right?
Yes, Hussein, true.
For example, how can I satisfy this precondition? And in the first place, I want to find a value in the array.
Correct.
I'm not sure if it is there or not. So how can I make? How can I satisfy the precondition? I want
Ah.
from the method to find.
خلاص خلاص, that's a good one. Good one. Now, this is something I'm going to talk about towards the end of today's lecture, when I'm going to talk about this designing good specs, right? But since you talked about it, let's discuss it here even. So probably it will be a piece of cake there. So if I understand your correct question correctly, you're saying that, for a client to use this method, he has to first make sure that, that this variable value is at least once in an array, correct? So the question, if I understand your question correctly, say, let's say we have this array 1, 2, 3, and we're looking for a value of 4, right? Who is responsible to checking this, correct? This is the question, Hussein, right?
Yes.
Right? That who is responsible to checking that this precondition is satisfied or not, whether the value 4 exists in the array or not. Now, you use specs to define that who is responsible for doing that, because you're saying that, in this case, in this specific example, you are saying my find method will be able to give you the lowest possible index as long as you give me an array in which that element occurs at least once, right? So you are putting the bound on the client to make sure they send you an array in which this array element 4 exists at least once. If they send an array like this, you are not making any promise on the effect or the post condition whatsoever. Because remember, we said if input precondition is not satisfied, the post condition is unconstrained. So this is the whole idea, that you put your preconditions to put the onus on, or the responsibility on the clients to give you that value, that kind of array or structure for your program to give them the output. Now, if you have to check every time here, right, that an input has come, and does it has the value inside it or not, right? If you're gonna do this check every time yourself, then there's no point of putting this precondition whatsoever. Do you agree with me on this statement? Let me rephrase my statement. In this piece of code, if I am every time just to make sure that an element occurs at least once in an array, in my piece of code, always before I go on and find that value, I'm going to make sure that that value exists in the array. Then there is no point of putting this precondition whatsoever. Basically, you can weaken them up. You don't even have a precondition here. Halas, you say, give me an array. I have a complex enough code where I'll be able to go and look at it for you and do everything for you, right? But if you
Yes.
don't want to do that, that's the whole point. If you put some preconditions, this means you don't want your method to be doing that specific action.
But now the client needs a method, or he needs to write a piece of code to check whether the value exists or not.
Correct.
He will rewrite the find method. He will write something similar to it. So what is the
Exactly.
point?
What's the point? Exactly. That's why.
This is my question.
Yes, yes. So this is where now we're gonna look at this and we're gonna know this is where we'll say what makes good specs as compared to bad specs, right? That and what kind of preconditions we should have, or what kind of post conditions we should have, right? Remember here the client is not someone who is outside your development team, right? Of course, right? Because we're talking about methods here, right? And classes here. So this is within your development team most of the time, right? So this is your design decision that this method will be only, so if you put this precondition, you are making a design decision here that this method will only be doing this, finding for you. Now, just bear with me. Probably if we have time today, I'll show you an example, and that's an amazing question, to be honest. I'll show you an example towards the very last slide of the lecture, where I'll make a case that, if you don't, and because if you don't have a precondition in that case, then there is no use of having that method to begin with, right? So very shortly, you will see that I'm going to advocate that, of course, you minimize your preconditions, because the minimum the preconditions you have, the more the easier it will be for clients to use it, as I said here, right? So if you put less demands on the clients, more easier it will be for them to use your piece of code. But how low you should go, and this means you should not have any precondition. That's a debate thing, because that's what the design is all about. This is what you're designing in your application, right? What is an aim on this will boil down to the objective of your method. That what's an objective of my method.
Doctor, I have I have one more question regarding the precondition and post condition. You
Yes.
said that one of the purposes to weaken the preconditions that to make it easier for the client to put an input. But what if we make like one functionality or one spec that it's not used by the client directly, like it's inside the system, like for processing something or doing something that does not have anything with the client, but it's like supporting function. I hope
Khalas.
the
Yes. So
is
basically,
clear.
let me put this way. So for example, you're saying here, remember, first of all, everybody is understanding that when we're in the specs, this means we're talking about probably the same development team, right? Or even
Yes,
you individually as a developer, even, to be honest, right? Now, so what I understand is that or maybe the question is, can I minimize my specs, this specs, and I have minimal to no precondition, right? So that a lot of clients can use this method, right? And then within it, I will have another set of methods, which is purely internal to me, and I'll do
yes,
these kind of checks, right?
yes, and because the purpose is not there, so I could control the preconditions, weakness, and strength.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly. And now this is what I was trying to answer to Hussein as well. Is that
Yes,
that see this whole decision of what kind of preconditions I should have or what kind of postcondition I should have actually boils down to the objective of the piece of method you're writing. So if the objective of this piece of method is that let everybody for this finding functionality use my method, I will minimize the precondition in such a way that the other clients don't really have to worry about sorting them out or checking them out. Let them throw an array to me, and internally, so I really reduce my precondition to almost null here. So in other words, I'll take any value, any array, and then within my own structure, I may have multiple new methods here, which is completely masked from these ones, and I'll let them check them, and I'll return the values back to this one, and this will satisfy and return the values. Absolutely, this is your design decision. This is the modularity. This is what the code bad smells ideas, refactoring ideas were, right? That you have methods which you're basically doing one thing, and then you can have more methods which do some specific tasks. Absolutely, go on and do it. That's the whole idea of designing specs, because then your objective of this method is very clear. Objective of this method is you want all the find functionalities required by the rest of the program to happen through this one. In that case, probably you will have null preconditions.
Yes, clear now, Doctor.
Right? Hussein, is it clear now? I'll give you an example, inshallah, at the end
Yes,
as
yes,
well.
yes.
Right?
It
Where
is
we'll
it's like
basically,
a video.
yeah, and probably, there will we see that, it's not always advisable to have no precondition. Of course, the message again today is to minimize precondition, but there will be a case where you should have some precondition. Otherwise, why to begin with in the structure of the specs we didn't, we just remove preconditions. So we will need preconditions in some cases. So far, so good.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So with understanding of these three dimensions, the deterministic versus underdetermined, the declarative versus operational, and this weakness versus stronger specs. Let's look at some examples, some bad examples to use them for our discussion. And again, this whole spec idea is actually, kind of summarizing this. By the way, designing good specs actually is going to summarize all the things we have been learning, in a sense, in the semester, all the concept of modularization, making smaller methods, smaller classes, single responsibility, masking. See, this was even masking. Remember, this is like your facade, right? So masking internal functionality from outer functionality, all of that stuff, right? So basically, what makes a good method? Because again, here I'm just picking method as a unit. It could be a class or so on and so forth. So what makes a good method? Basically the whole that you write specifications for your methods. This is what the whole design boils down to. That because this piece of code, you don't want everybody to come in and read your piece of code every time. The whole idea of the whole design, to be honest, boils down to writing specifications for your piece of code. And of course, it's very clear, it's very obvious that the more the clearer your post specifications are, the more the well structured they are, the easier they are to read. And the easier they are to read, the easier the whole method is to be used and operational in the program. So your specs should be coherent, right? They should not have a lot of different cases in it, right? So this is a recommendation. Again, when we say specs don't have a lot of different cases, like for example, it doesn't have long arguments, it does not have deeply nested if conditions, Boolean flags, all of that stuff. This, if you recall and if you sit back and reflect, basically this is the whole things we have been learning throughout the semester, isn't it? That we should have smaller methods, more modular methods, a single responsibility, structure them in such a way that we minimize the coupling between them and so on and so forth. So this is again the same message here. If your spec is too broad, this means your method is too generic in nature. This means it's a very complicated method, which is not recommended. Now, what's happening here? In this specs, there is no, for example, precondition here, right? So it's a very, very generic method. Of course, because you have specs, you don't have to read the code.
It will sum the array, the elements of the arrays, and give you the result.
Yeah, so basically it will sum all the indexes in the array, right? And at which the value of this value appeared, right? So you can imagine that it will have a nested for loops for sure, right? Or multiple for loops, right?
Yes.
Right, and then you're traversing this array, you're traversing this array, then you're summing them up, and so on and so forth. So one can argue that is this a well-designed procedure? Because when your specs are such a broad specs, the question comes to mind for sure is that is this method a well-designed method? And the answer is probably not, because see, it's not coherent. This method itself is not coherent, and how you're judging it? You're judging it from the specs. That several things are happening here. You're actually traversing two arrays. You're summing their indexes. Rather than doing everything in one method, why don't you split them into two procedures? One which does the finding the index, another one which does the sum. The same thing we were talking about up here, right? The same thing we were talking about up here, right? That if you reduce the preconditions, then probably you're better off splitting these methods into smaller methods and control it this way, right? Is this point clear?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just one to begin with, Yes, please go ahead.
Doctor, I have a question regarding the specs. Okay. For example, when I writing the specs, is it better to write just the effect and a precondition? Does it make a precondition to make it easier for the implementer and make my method like not complex but more usable for the implementer?
So in other words, you basically write specs like this, where basically, no, uh, this is something you are interested in for sure. But if you're gonna make everything as vague as this, right, or as generic as this, right, what's the problem then? The problem here is that your methods will become very, very complicated, right? And the moment they will become very complicated, you are prone to issues. You're prone to issues of changing them. You're prone to issues of having bugs in them. You will have prones and issues with testing them, right? So that's the whole idea. These writing specs is not an isolation task in regards to the whole design process. This is a very key last level details you're designing. So you as a designer still have to think about what methods are there, what they are doing really. And that's why should it be one method, should it be multiple methods? Maybe as we discussed a minute ago, maybe this is the way you like that. You as a designer have an objective that this sum all, for example, needs to be used for everyone, so hence I will have no precondition. But I will design in such a way still that I have multiple other internal methods which are masked from the clients, but they are there because then it will be easier for me to check it, update it, correct it, find bugs, so on and so forth, right? So this is the whole idea.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is at the end of the day, your what you call your design decision, right? Now let's see what's happening here now. So what this piece of code is doing, right? Of course, here you have to read the code, right? While here, in this case, this is the same thing. You don't have to read the code, right? You just understand this from the specs, right? This is the first observation here, right?
Yes,
Now,
it's
what
clear
this
here.
method, yeah. So what this method is doing?
Return the the longest word length.
Exactly. So it's returning the longest word length, right? Now,
Eh,
yes, go ahead.
I think I think there is an issue here because
Mhm.
if the list just contain four length words, it
Mhm.
won't read it because he said it at the beginning at 5. So
Yes, yeah. So see, this is a good one here, right? So over if you look at this one, yes, this is okay. This is better, it's explaining me what it's just doing. So of course, this is far better than reading the code. But the real issue here is that, in addition to using nested loops and all of that stuff, in a one method, unnecessary, again, we're using global variables here, right? And so on and so forth. So again, this is an issue here that, as you said, if you have a length of 4, then it won't work, right? So, the client has to understand this now, right? And it's not mentioned at all in this specs, right? So this is a very interesting observation by you that of course it's not recommended. It's not really a good idea to have these global variables used in this way, right? So, and again, the method, if you look more closely, again, it's doing multiple things. It's like from a single responsibility perspective, it's doing multiple things. It's counting the words, finding the longest word. Again, why not? We separate them out into two different methods, make them easier to understand, easy to change, and so on and so forth. Everybody's comfortable with this observation?
yes,
Great. Uh, okay. Now, let's look at another example. Now, what's happening in this example? So what this method is doing?
doing a lot of things.
It's doing a lot of things, right? So first of all, it's a put method in the map, right? And what's the precondition? Precondition is that value could be a null one, right? Or map may contain null values, correct? So you're kind of, really relaxing your precondition here, correct? Everybody's on board with me on this?
Yes, it's like not even. I think it's not even like a precondition. Just
Yeah, it's just
uh,
stating it, right?
stating. Yeah,
Stating an obvious here, for example, right? Just saying that this can be done. Now, what's an post condition? What's an effect? What it will do? What this put method will do? It will insert that key into the map, right? And then
yes,
it will also override an existing mapping for the key and return the old value of the key, right? Unless like none. And in this case, what will happen? It will return a null value, right? Or it will return null, right? Now, what's the problem with this spec? From an understanding perspective, from a clarity perspective, if you are the client of this one, of this method.
it's too long and contain many things.
Mm,
Like I think there is a if statement here. Like if
mm,
this happen, it will happen this, and
mm,
more
mm,
than one situation.
mm. Anything else is happening here, right?
Maybe it is not deterministic. I
Not
don't know
deterministic.
what will be the output.
What will be the output exactly? Like if you look at the precondition, it says no, it doesn't rule out the null values, right? So if you look at this one, it doesn't rule out the null values, correct? But the post condition uses the null as a special return value for a missing key, right? So it's using a null value to also reflect that if there's a missing key here. Now, if the null is returned, you as a client cannot tell whether the key was not bound previously or whether it was in fact a null value which is being returned, correct?
Yes, yes.
All right. And of course, it's not a good design, right? Because you don't want the client to be confused about, the return value. It should be very clear to them the moment they read it, and that's it, right? So this brings us to this question again that, how strong the specs should be. Of course, at the end of the day, specs should give clients strong enough guarantees in general cases, right? And it should help them satisfy their basic requirements. There's no doubt about it. And we can be using or be more extra careful when specifying the special cases, right? To make sure that they don't undermine what otherwise will be a useful method. So you don't want to end up with a situation where people are confused about the null values and what's the return value and what it really means, and that's not recommended. Uh, so another point, again, this will lead to another example, which is basically, if you look at this one, what I'm saying here, there is no point throwing an exception for a bad argument, but allowing arbitrary mutations because a client won't be able to determine what mutations have actually taken place. Now, let me explain this with the help of this example. Now, what is happening here? What's the problem with this one? The
There is no
problem,
precondition because
there's no precondition, hence everything is very generic, right?
yes, because list two might be longer than list one, and so or vice versa.
Exactly. And then if you're going to throw a null pointer exception, you as a client are left to figure out on their own whether the elements of list 2 actually made it to the list 1 or not, right?
Yes.
Right. So again, this is not recommended. This is not something we look over. So the whole idea, the reason I'm showing you these bad examples here is just to emphasize the point that, you should try your best to use your preconditions and postconditions, which means your specs, to make them as comprehensive as possible and as clearer as possible and as cohesive as possible, or in a sense, and cohesive as possible. So, and these things will only happen if you have thought about them throughout your design process, correct? This will naturally happen. The more that the modular your systems are, the more the single responsibility they are doing, more you think about the preconditions and the post conditions, and think about sending our meaningful exceptions, meaningful messages, more precise, more deterministic in nature, the better you will be, right? So I think we have a couple of minutes, so probably I will not be able to finish this lecture today, which is okay. Inshallah, we'll continue and finish it on Sunday. But let's do one more example and then we'll stop, right? So we have another spec here. Is there any precondition for this spec? It's no precondition, right?
Yeah.
So what's the
Clearly.
post condition? Post condition says open a file named file name, right? Whatever the file name you're telling me, I'll open a file. Now I'm saying it's weak enough specific, like it's very vague, as we were discussing earlier line, why not we make our specs a bit more vague and very general and open-ended? The problem here is that in this case, it's very generic. It's very open-ended, no preconditions. Post conditions are even, very simple that, a file is open. But the problem is, it's actually not countering or considering some very important things. I'm saying it's a bad specification, and the reason I'm saying it's a bad specification is because it's lacking some very important details. What details are missing here, guys? Can you think of those
What if the
details?
file is not exist?
Exactly. What if the file doesn't exist? What this method is going to do, right? Is it going to create a new one, right? It doesn't tell you anything about that, right? You might end up going to reading the code there, which is again not something you want to do. Anything else comes to mind that this is very vague and it's not covering
What
those
if the
details?
file is already opened?
Yeah, what if the file is already open, right? And we can think of many cases, right? For example, we can think of a case like whether file is open for reading or writing. It doesn't say so anything about that, right? Or what if the file doesn't exist or you need to create it, or the file, as you said, file is already maybe open, right? Maybe you don't even have the rights to do anything and so on and so forth, right? So, again, we have to be careful of our specs. I think it's 10:50, so probably I think it's a good point to stop here, inshallah. We're nearly there. Inshallah, we'll complete this, inshallah, after the weekend. Let me stop the recording and take the attendance, and then inshallah, we'll take it from there. Muhammad, are you not with us now? I think something happened here, right?